The National Investor's motto is, you can get information anywhere, but here you get knowledge. And for well over 40 years now, Chris Temple has imparted that knowledge, an unparalleled, understandable, and useful take on the big picture of the markets and of our world. He has been out in front of what you see on the news every day on many themes. More, Chris has taken this macro knowledge and his unique analytical abilities to uncover unique investment opportunities. Often, he has guided his members to big winners in resources, biotech stocks, and more. His talents and connections often getting him into ground floor opportunities before they are discovered. Without further ado, here is Chris with today's topic.
Welcome back, everybody. In just a few minutes, I'll be joined once again by my old friend Scott Melbye. Scott is the foremost expert, frankly, on uranium and the nuclear energy industry in the U.S., arguably one of the top ones in the world. And from time to time, we roll up our sleeves and dive into what the current state of the market is. The last time I had him on was about the 1st of April or thereabouts, and he and I were very much of the view that we were going to see some things coalesce to launch what I have long called Act Two of the bull market that started a few years back for uranium and nuclear energy stocks. It's been kind of in fits and starts since then. We've seen a lot of the equipment makers, the SMR stories, some of the technology along nuclear power have renewed moonshots in just the recent past. The uranium producers, somewhat less so. The uranium price until just recent days has kind of stayed mired in, it's correction territory, bottom in the upper 60s a pound on the spot market or so forth. It's perked up since then. We'll talk to Scott about some of the reasons why and et cetera. Chiefly today, we're going to focus on the recent executive orders by President Trump and how those are going to kickstart some of the aspects of this story in the coming months and arguably years, more than likely. But before we do that, even though we're not going to be talking specifically about Uranium Energy Corporation, of which Scott is vice president, or Uranium Royalty Corporation, of which he is the CEO. And he also, for good measure, is head of the Uranium Producers Association of America. Those are his three main hats, I guess you can say. But even though we won't be talking about those specifically, something that he says or I say may well still be construed as a forward-looking statement that would benefit those companies, at least. And so here we just want to remind you of that, and that things don't always turn out as and when you think they should. And Scott, clearly, as I am, is a very passionate advocate for nuclear power and all of the benefits it will bring to society and to the world in the years ahead, in our views. And so we're certainly wearing our bullishness on our sleeves. But as I said, we're going to look chiefly at President Trump's recent executive orders. And now here you see from the Energy Department's own website, there are 9 key takeaways from the president's recent executive order. The main goals: speed up licensing for new nuclear reactors, add by 2050 300 gigawatts, that would quadruple current capacity, faster reactor testing and approvals, deploy reactors for military bases and artificial intelligence, a lot of private activity already there. Fuel recycling and reprocessing is a big one. We used to have pretty much the market cornered. Uranium production has to come back. We're only starting that process after years of being dormant. Bolster the workforce. That's a big one with all these different extractive industries, as I've said many times. And then moving on, energy exports. I skipped past the spent fuel and what needs to be done with that. And at the bottom of this particular page, I'll have the link in the notes. You can sign up for the Energy Department's own list. And one more quick thing, imminently, before we get too deep into the summer, I'll be dusting off and updating a sector-specific report of my own at the National Investor on uranium and nuclear energy, all the different moving parts. I have said many times, you've heard me say elsewhere, that arguably aside from gold, I am more bullish on uranium than I am on any other natural resource, metal, raw material, or what have you, and for a lot of reasons. And you'll see the updated list of those reasons and a whole lot more, and some profile looks at some of our recommended companies, international investor, coming up very, very soon. If you're not already on my email list, to get those things, or make sure that you avail yourself of that. Here's all of the various contact information to follow me on social media, drop me an email, get on my free email list at the very least. And here once again is my old buddy Scott Melbye. Scott, glad you could join me again for another update on what's going on and everything to do with the nuclear and uranium world.
Well, it's my pleasure, Chris. And there's no shortage of items in the news on nuclear. It seems like every other day we have huge positive announcements. So it's exciting.
Yeah, and we'll hit some of those. We'll take a lap through that DOE list that I talked about before you came on here. But before we get into that, another comment that I made before you came on is that aside from gold, I'm more bullish on uranium than on anything. And one of the reasons you and I were talking about before we started to record this is that unlike so many other things, even fossil fuels, let alone a lot of the base metals, copper, lithium, and stuff, there's been opposition because we've got to have new mines and people don't like it. Relatively speaking, everybody is on board with uranium. It's astonishing. I mean, when a while back, and you and I have talked about this before, when the global scold, Greta Thunberg, even
Yeah.
says, well, gee, if I've got a choice between strip mine and German towns for coal and seeing Germany get back into nuclear energy, we should be doing nuclear energy. When she says it, let alone
Yeah.
everybody else, it's the time has arrived, hasn't it?
Yeah, it really has. And I think, the green energy transition really gave us the bipartisan political support and really changed public opinions towards nuclear. I think the realization you can't get to a lower carbon future on just wind and solar
No.
alone. And that just, has been laid bare in places like Germany, Australia, where they've just had massive failures and unreliable electricity. Um,
California.
California is another. But I think it's really something because even, at the start of the Biden administration, there were very few people put into the Department of Energy that were kind of nuclear people, besides just the immediate nuclear energy office appointees. It was a lot of wind, solar, and electric vehicle people. But by halfway through the term, they were jumping on board with legislation. So, in the last Congress, we had huge successes. The production tax credits, which are now continuing to be discussed as part of the big budget bill that hopefully will pass here shortly. Those have huge impact for nuclear, both existing plants and new plants. Now, in this latest bill, a lot of those subsidies are going to be dropped for wind and solar, but it looks like they'll be continued into the 2030s for nuclear, which is great. I mean, one thing you can say about those production tax credits, they worked. We
Yeah.
built a lot of wind and solar as a result. Now, it doesn't work very well, and it's very unreliable. And there's a whole other sort of number of issues around that. But I think that's has been very positive. So we have Republicans and Democrats don't agree on anything, but they do agree that nuclear should be in the mix, and they get there for different reasons. But I'm just glad, as someone who spends a lot of time up on Capitol Hill, that we've got a lot of support up there.
Yeah, that's again way more so than with a lot of the other commodities and a lot of the other industries that are concerned. Recently you and I visited, kind of catching up a little bit, and that was right about the time that Sprott had announced a significant capital raise, got everybody in the market excited. We bottomed at what on the spot price, $65 a pound, give or take a little bit.
Yeah, maybe a little below that. 63, 64
Yeah,
was because the low, it was really, we had a spot market, which was just on sleep mode. There was
right.
no volume, not a lot of liquidity. Now, you could argue that, it's actually a bullish consideration that it didn't fall further, given the lack of trades. But I think that's also an indication of how thin the offer side is. There weren't a lot of buyers in the market, but there weren't a lot of sellers. And
Sure.
yeah, that's all being tested now in real time with the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust's $200 million raise, which closed last week. And they've been buying uranium over the course of over the last 2 weeks ago, and they've been buying uranium over the course of last week. So.
Yeah, and so here, and I haven't looked in the last few days. Where are we roughly? Is your last look as we hit the halfway point of the year now?
Yeah, so we're now trading in the spot market around 78.50. So as expected,
Hmm.
those real thin supplies on the offer have been consumed by this Sprott purchasing. They're probably more than halfway through purchasing of that material. More to come, but it kind of sends signals to others that might be on the sidelines. I mean, summer's typically a very slow time for
Right.
utility purchasing. But if you were thinking of entering the market in September, maybe after the World Nuclear Association meetings in London, you might be rethinking that now and wanting to get out ahead of that. And we did see a utility come out for an RFP last week. So again, I don't think Sprott can be the only demand that drives this market, but I think it served to really shake the market out of sleep mode because we know utilities have been in a less than replacement level contracting in the long-term market. I think when the price did bottom in the low 60s and began to creep up, you did see increased utility purchasing even a little bit before the Sprott. So they were already beginning to realize that the low was in, and it probably wasn't going to get any better than that. So I remain optimistic. I think we could still see $100 spot price by the end of the year once all this buying kicks in. Because remember, too, utilities will go into the long-term market again, and what they're going to find is there's not a lot of uncommitted production available. Producers that have material have contracted pretty aggressively, like Cameco is, probably heavily or largely sold out through
Right.
2030,
Right.
probably has minimal supplies to offer. And I think if you have any supplies yet to offer in the near term, you're probably going to be a little more disciplined on what you accept in terms of price. So utilities are either going to have to accept these thin supplies or pay up for long-term deliveries. If they don't like that, their only choice is to come back to the spot market. And as we've seen, the spot market can't handle that kind of volume. So we're in a real upward spiral now where spot feeds off of long-term and long-term feeds off of spot. So it
Yeah.
should be a real healthy second half of the year.
Well, and it's going to be a seller's market as you've been outlining. And what's interesting is that, for so many years, and you and I were oftentimes comparing notes on this, you had utilities sitting on their hands playing this game of chicken, seeing how much they could wear down producers or anybody that had uranium and get them to take something. And now the tables have turned. And now,
Yeah.
producers are the ones that are in a catbird seat saying, okay, how badly do you want the uranium that we've got? Because there isn't a
And
whole hell of a lot to go around. There's still an awful lot of contracting needs to come and just not enough product, isn't there?
there is, I mean, if we all acknowledge that there is a structural deficit now in the market, somewhere between 50 million pounds over the next year and a half, that's going to manifest itself in the long-term market because we largely believe that the spot market inventories, the excess inventories are largely worked off. And if I put on my uranium royalty hat and I'm traveling around the world meeting with, every possible miner developer that, we could invest in through royalties and streams, I'm just amazed at how little is in the pipeline. The easy stuff is kind of already advanced, and that hasn't actually been easy. But Paladin in Namibia, Boss in South Australia, and then the US guys coming on, those were the restarts. That was the low-hanging fruit. Now we need new mines, and they may be in parts of Africa that are challenging, or in Kazakhstan, which is largely going to be off limits to other than the Russian and Chinese going
Right.
forward. So you can't have a 12-year bear market with no investment in exploration and development cycles and expect not to have this happen. So I think for uranium investors, it's very bullish because I don't think this is a flash and crash kind of bull market rally that maybe we saw last go around. I think sustained higher prices are going to be needed, which will ultimately, stimulate that production. But it's, the barrier to entry is pretty high, and new production is not going to materialize overnight. So I think that's very bullish for price outlook.
Oh, for sure. And especially just to throw in a little thing for UEC as well. I mean, you guys having a lot of productive capacity. You've started or restarted a couple of projects, but you're not in any big hurry to sell because based on the picture that you just painted, the price is going to go a hell of a lot higher. You don't need to be in a hurry to sell.
Yeah, and no, that's very perceptive because we did say our threshold to restart in Wyoming and in Texas was $60. Obviously, we're trading well above that, but if prices had lingered more around the $70 level, we'd still, I mean, obviously, still move forward with Burke Hollow and Christensen Ranch, but we might the cadence of kind of timing new developments to ramp up production in situ mining can always be adjusted. I think we're going to see very strong prices
Hmm.
and strong policy, from the Trump administration, especially on domestic uranium. So I think we're going to be, ramping up, that 5 to 7 million pounds annual production by the end of the decade. But we do have the ability to ramp, pull back on that or accelerate. If things were even better, we saw purchases from, say, the U.S. government for U.S. origin unobligated uranium for defense needs, for example. We could, if we find the people and the drillers, we can produce more than that 5 to 7 million pounds. We have 12 million pounds of capacity.
Right.
Another one would be the hyperscalers. If some of the Microsoft, Googles, Amazons started making investments in fuel cycle to ensure their nuclear investments have fuel, we do have that additional capacity. So it's a really nice position to be in.
Well, and we've already seen announcements of that. I mean, who would have ever thought we'd see the 3 Mile Island discussed again in our lifetimes or anybody's lifetimes in a positive way? Yet one of the undamaged reactors is Microsoft's got that one, right? That's the one
Yes.
they want. And it makes sense what you just said, Scott, because when you go back to, before the bloom came off the rose of the electric vehicle story, what were companies like Tesla doing and Stellantis and GM and a bunch of them? Okay, we're going to produce EVs, but maybe we should look upstream and see what we're going to build them with. And so
Yeah,
you
I
had,
mean, a way to think of it is, the only thing between multi-trillion dollar market caps, for these Amazons, Microsofts, Metas, is energy. If they can
hmm,
access the energy to build the data centers to achieve their AI aspirations, they're willing to put, hundreds of millions of dollars. They're willing to go behind the meter
yeah,
and grab nuclear generated electricity before it hits the grid. If they're that proactive on the electricity, are they just going to sit on their hands with regards to the fuel and hope it's there? I mean, I think they're actually going to, it might be a wake-up call for the utilities once, some of these, they're not at the top of the food chain anymore. If
no,
Amazon comes in and starts, they could invest in uranium in a way that the rate regulated utilities or state-owned power companies aren't going to be able to know what hit them. So again, very bullish developments, and
yeah,
I think it's great that they're coming. I think nuclear energy is going to go to a place we wouldn't have gone to otherwise. They just bring the capital, the energy, the innovativeness, and I think Trump's making it easier for them as well. If under the executive orders, if he can limit the time it takes to permit and license new reactors,
right.
that helps risk these investments. No one wants an uncapped liability of licensing and permitting. But if that's resolved, then you still have the risk of construction delays and
Sure.
cost overrun. But we've got to get better at that as well. But Trump's certainly helping with the executive orders in a historic way.
Well, and that was the first of the 9 things. We'll run through those real quick before we do anything else, Scott. I want to get your
Mhm.
feedback, such as you have it. The very first thing on the Energy Department's list when they summed up the president's, it was a total of 4 executive orders, I think, of that covered different things. But the first was exactly that of speeding up
Yep.
licensing, permitting, and so forth.
Yeah, I think, the headline was that Trump would like to see a quadrupling of nuclear power in the United States by 2050. It's very
Yep.
Trump-like to not go tripling. Everybody else threw out the aspirational goal of tripling, and Trump's quadrupling. Like to see ground break on 10 large reactors by the end of the decade,
Yep.
which that sounds very aspirational, and that goes beyond just the small modular and micro reactors. But if you're in parts of the United States like Virginia, where you have exponential growth in base load growth
Well,
on
because
your
of the data centers and whatnot.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
data centers will consume 40% of all the electricity generated in the Commonwealth of Virginia within two
Wow.
years. They have to build a lot of, generating capacity, and they probably don't need 100 and 200 megawatts at a time. They need 1,000, megawatt units coming online. So I think that's where you're going to see large reactors, but you're going to also, Trump would like to see SMRs sped up, and licensing and permitting for those. He'd like to see those, especially if they've been reviewed and approved, literally in less than 6 months, getting permits and licenses for those. If they could be sited on defense land, on military installations or federal lands, and if that would help speed up the construction or co-siting with data centers on federal land, that's another element of the executive orders. So, out west, we're already see the coal to nuclear transition. And I think,
Right.
energy dominance in a Trump sense, it's all about natural gas, nuclear, and probably continued reliance on coal.
Mhm.
And I don't think that's a bad thing, because I
Right.
think few years extension on perfectly good coal plants in the United States will actually give a better transition for some of these small modular advanced reactors throughout the Western United States. So,
Well, and
uh,
less costly for business and for the economy as well, if we're not doing
yeah,
something abrupt and jacking up the price of everything else because we're shutting it down prematurely, for sure. Well, you already
yeah.
hit on the high points of the first few of the Energy Department's list. Another one I want to talk about was the recycling and reprocessing.
Mhm.
We went through a phase some years ago of the all of the dismantled nuclear weapons that got turned into fuel, and that kept a damper
Mhm.
on the uranium market for a long time until all that got used up. What else needs to be done in that area right now? Because that one kind of, I have to admit, that one kind of surprised me as to what they're
Yeah,
projecting
I think
that is.
it's really, I frankly think it's positive, even though it might offset some uranium demand. This isn't going to happen overnight. We're talking, decades down the road. But I think if you help solve the back end spent fuel issue, or
Okay.
reduce the volume that needs to be placed in permanent geological repository, that's a really positive thing for our industry. And I think we'll have more reactors ordered and built as a result. So I'm very pro reprocessing.
Yeah.
I think it would be, we recycle everything in society. Why
Right.
wouldn't, there's still 80% of the energy in those spent fuel rods. And again, I don't see it as a threat as much as it is a very positive development for nuclear. We'll see more plants and more uranium demand as a result.
When people realize that the back end is going to be less burdensome as far as storing stuff, not trying to find some new deep cave that we've got to obsess over and spend a lot of money and whatnot over.
Yep.
Let's focus on another one of those on that list of nine, Scott, that most affects, of course, what you do with
Mhm.
UC and even uranium royalty, and that is the domestic uranium supply, and not just the
Yep.
uranium out of the ground but about HALEU and everything else. I know that the administration is really understanding that beyond just uranium mining, that we need to get back control of enriched products, which we're still dependent on overseas sources for.
Yeah. We saw in the last Congress, we saw the Nuclear Fuel Security Act direct funding in the billions to kind of kickstart low enriched uranium and high assay low enriched uranium, which would stimulate purchases by the U.S. government of U.S. Origin uranium conversion and enrichment. That program is continuing. It's been slower than most would like in terms of execution, but that's still continuing. But this is on top of that, and it's just a recognition that, we did allow our fuel cycle in the United States to atrophy when we kind of went globalist and we said, okay, Soviet Union's breaking up, let's embrace Russia. And, we kind of fell very reliant on Russian, Uzbek, Kazakh uranium. 50% of our uranium for 20% of our electricity comes from those countries, and the enrichment side as well was about 25%. So, I think the thinking here is in that executive order was if there can be loan guarantees for build out of capacity, if there can be additional purchases through the Defense Production Act to stimulate private investment, that's really good policy. And don't forget that, we do have a looming need for U.S. origin unobligated uranium. That means uranium which can be used for non-peaceful purposes. For example, the fuel for aircraft carriers and submarines.
Mm-hmm.
That stockpile is it was built up in the 60s and 70s, is drawing down in the 2030s. And so some of these purchases will not only kind of be a benefit to the nuclear energy industry, but could result in strategic uranium reserve stockpiles being built back up again. And I know the first Trump administration did establish the strategic uranium reserve. The
Right.
recommendation
Yeah, I
was
wanted to
for
ask about what's new with that.
1.5 billion dollars spent on uranium over 10 years. They ended up doing just 75 million over 1 year, but just slightly over 1 million pounds of U.S. origin uranium was quickly ring-fenced by the NNSA, which is the DOE defense side, and recognizing the value of that U.S. origin uranium. So I think, just the global supply and demand fundamentals couldn't be more bullish and supportive of U.S. uranium mining. But if you layer on that there is very specific needs for U.S. origin on the defense side, that's really that could have a profound impact on U.S. uranium mining.
So do you see new or augmented purchases coming from the government under that?
Yeah, we're hopeful. One of the things that came out, there was another executive order on critical minerals, which started 232 investigations on a number of critical minerals,
Right.
including uranium. And the industry this time around, I mean, the last time one of those investigations was started, it was at the request of two companies in the U.S. Now, this time it's the president requesting it. The Uranium Producers of America have chimed in and said, listen, the biggest thing you can do for us, we don't have issues with imports from Canada or Australia. There's no unfair trade practices. We can compete with those companies and countries all day long. But we really emphasized in our filings that we've got to keep Russian and Chinese dumping and predatory pricing out of our market. So obviously the Russia ban is in place. It kicks in
Right.
fully in 2027, December of 27. But we are seeing the beginnings of sort of Chinese collaboration with the Russians to circumvent kind of the way you see Iranian oil sanctions evaded through shell game of third-party
All
swapping
right.
of materials.
Or
So we
Chinese
will,
products end up in Mexico and you slap a made in Mexico label on them.
yeah, so we see that happening on Russian EUP, and so we'd like to see the ban extended there. But we've also recommended to the president that, hey, you got it right in your first term. Let's revisit the strategic uranium reserve and fund it the way you had intended it to be funded in Trump 1.0. So these are all very positive developments. There's a lot of there's so many moving parts back in DC right now, but all of them are extremely positive for both the demand side for more reactors and the fuel cycle as well.
Yeah, and real quick, Scott, before we move on and start to wind down, Section 232, just to remind people, that's a provision that authorizes the government to basically look at the national security implications of certain imports, and if there is a national security implication, that empowers the president more fully to
Yeah.
stop those imports, restart
Yeah, he
domestic
has a full
production.
range of powers in those, by law, he can impose tariffs,
Right.
quotas, bans, any number of things to correct that national security threat. So extremely positive.
Yeah.
Another piece of legislation that I'll just throw out there, but it could have profound impacts. Senator Lindsey Graham put forward a bill in the Senate which has 82 co-sponsors, not just support by 82, but senators that'll put their name on the bill itself that would ban Russian imports immediately. So cut off the waiver process and impose a 500% tariff on third countries who continue to buy Russian oil, gas, and uranium. And this was really to address Russia's failure to sit down at the table and negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine. And as you know, Republicans, Democrats, there's still a lot of support. You visit Capitol Hill, there's still a lot of offices, both Dems and Republicans, that have a Ukrainian flag, flying outside there or wearing the lapel pins. So that, goes beyond kind of fuel and kind of speaks to a real strong desire to see Russia, either come to the table and negotiate or really face further sanctions.
And that's all well and good, but if that were to pass and the president were to sign that, where does the uranium come from that all of a sudden isn't going to come in?
Yeah, it would put, greater strain on Western supplies, but
That's for
let's
sure.
face it, we don't think that the market would be in a, we don't believe plants would shut down. It just
Oh,
means that Urenco, Orano, Western enrichers, it doesn't all have to come from the United States. It can come from, Western Europe, Australia, Canada, the US. But we have to step up our game. So I think that would have a
fast.
big impact. But
Yeah,
I think that too, and look for, the China ban could be a real positive catalyst.
yeah,
We're lobbying very hard for that, and we're seeing very strong support. Again, House and Senate, Republican, Democrats, no one thinks we should, just get off a Russian addiction and then we get hooked on Chinese
sure.
uranium imports.
That makes sense. One of the things I was really pleased to see on that list of
Hmm.
nine is the recognition that there needs to be major workforce development. It's like
Yes.
so many of the extractive industries, whether it's
Hmm.
old energy, mining, whatever, there aren't the people out there to do it. I was
Yeah.
talking to a guy a while back. I ran a copper panel at a conference just over a year ago. One of the guys I had on there who was very tight with and represents a lot of the copper interests, development stage companies in Arizona. He made the point bluntly. He said, if you could wave a magic wand and tomorrow these were all permitted, we still can't open them up, start construction because the 3,000 plus people that we need to fill different jobs and specialized roles, they ain't there.
Yeah. No, it's we at UEC have really been in a hiring phase here over the last year and a half, 2 years. And we've been fortunate. We have found the people, but we've had to take people that come from the oil and gas industry. There are kind of similar complementary skill sets with
Yeah,
ISR mining and natural gas. So we're taking them. We've been taking some people from the coal industry who, making a change to nuclear at this time is probably not a bad thing. But we are getting there. But that is our we have 12 million pounds of capacity, licensed capacity in the US, and we're currently only working towards 5 to 7 million annual production by 2030. The constraint is drillers and people, so it is very real.
yeah.
But you know, um, markets do work as well. So, if we were pushed, I think, we would just have to overcome those challenges.
Right. Do you think there'll be actually any funding for trade schools or for people who would go into these specific industries that we need?
Yeah, no, it's important, and the trades are critically important in the uranium space. I'm actually meeting with our Congresswoman Hageman this week on these type of trade jobs in Wyoming and what can be done through community colleges or otherwise to encourage more students to go down that path. Not everybody has to go to college, and you might make more money as a welder, plumber,
True.
electrician. So yeah, I think it's and we hear more people are going that route, but we'll see.
Yeah, okay. And the last thing in the Energy Department's list of things, maybe it's a little premature in some ways, although I know in the technology area it's already being done, is as with everything, Trump wants to export American
Mhm.
greatness and American technology and American power and energy. We're exporting LNG already. We don't have the uranium. Certainly, we're not an exporter of it, but we do have already some opportunities to export technology and partner with other countries with some good U.S. companies. Can you give us a couple examples of
Yeah,
that? I know.
so we led the world in nuclear energy, in the 70s, 80s.
Sure.
Companies like Westinghouse and GE were the gold standard. And then we kind of lost that leadership to the Koreans, to the Russians, the Chinese. But there's a real concerted effort. We are good at small modular advanced reactors. The nuclear navy has been an incredible success story. So we know how to do this. And I think there is a desire to really reestablish our leadership in that area and, also with AP1000s with Westinghouse. And there are enormous market opportunities. Just take Central Europe, from the Baltics all the way down to the Balkans. Huge growing market because you have a lot of those countries, Romania, Czech Republic, Poland, that are, as they become, more assimilated into the European community, they're obviously being pressured to shut down their coal-fired power plants. But in their case, they can't turn to natural gas from Russia. So nuclear is the preferred method for them. So countries like Poland are going with large reactors and small reactors. But how do we go to those countries and say, well, buy this U.S. advanced reactor, small modular reactor, but sorry, we can't provide the fuel. So this build out of the fuel cycle is not just for us to be self-reliant, but also be able to provide the whole fuel cycle of American uranium conversion and enrichment. So it's really I think that executive order is very welcome because we do see a lot of we're not state-owned, entities. We're a collection of private companies in the U.S. But if you have the White House and the president and the various agencies going along with our exporters and leveraging deals, where let's say a country wants our Iron Dome, defense systems or the latest fighter aircraft. It's like, I think the Trump method would be, okay, yeah, we'll sell you this latest technology for your defense. But when it comes to buying a reactor, don't think of going to the Chinese or
Right.
Russians, get Westinghouse or some of these other US designs. So the
Yeah.
art of the deal will certainly be in play there. And I think it could be a very good boost for all of our business models.
Oh, for sure. Well, it's a great bullish picture. You and I have been painting and repainting it for a while as these things have heated up in the last few years, and now they're about to again. Some of those SMR developers and some of the technology plays, even before we had this pop in uranium price start to wake a few people back up. Some of these stocks have been moonshots.
Yeah,
Just,
Oklo, SMR,
yep.
two of the biggest movers, and yeah, I mean, why not? This is,
Yeah.
I think SMRs, advanced reactors, will revolutionize the way energy is generated and distributed. The big period of growth is 2030 on, but I
Yep.
think Trump's executive orders are going to advance the time frame on the
Oh yeah.
demonstration of some of these much earlier than the 28, 29, 30 time frame. I think some of these, if they're being built at Idaho National Labs or on defense sites, you could see them moving a lot more quickly. And the goal is factory built, shipped on site. Once we get standardization of these and can factory, churn these out, they could be like, gas turbine generators
Right.
in that sense. So yeah, and that demand really isn't factored into, when you see the
Yeah.
supply and demand forecasts of UXC or the World Nuclear Association, we're still kind of that doubling of nuclear generation that we see happening by the 2040s. That's still largely the larger, existing
Right.
reactors, and the new large reactors being built doesn't really factor in what could be exponential growth from SMRs.
Sure. Yeah, and you
That's how you.
pointed that out before. That's potentially huge because
Mm,
SMRs are going to be running everything. I mean, think of a ship that's doing undersea mining under the sea or on the seabed. Think of a major fracking operation. I had this discussion
yep,
with a guy in New York recently who's an expert in this area, and I asked him, when I was at a place in northern Colorado back at the end of April, and I saw two F-16 jet engines that are the turbines powering the
yeah,
power plant to frack a dozen or so wells. Damn, you
yeah.
would think that at some point there's going to be an SMR running that. He says, just wait, it's already in the works. So
It
there's,
is coming even in very Democrat-leaning Colorado.
yeah,
We changed the law to consider nuclear energy is now a viable alternative in our state power planning process. And there's a lot of very positive talk about, again, the some of these coal plants may get a couple more years lease on life under a Trump administration, but eventually they're going to come to the end of their useful lives.
right.
And I would much rather, as a ratepayer and a consumer of electricity in Colorado, I would much rather have those replaced by nuclear and have 24/7 abundant, resilient, reliable, affordable power than intermittent wind and solar. So it
That's,
is catching on all across the West.
yeah.
It's a topic that is quite common.
Well, and Germany's the last holdout, but they've started to crack recently. They dropped their opposition to new nuclear power generation EU wide, I
Yeah,
guess you'd say. And what the heck was the other thing that they just did recently? They haven't done anything yet, as far as the country is concerned.
yeah. But they, yeah, I mean, they're now literally saying, well, yeah, no, maybe, maybe these advanced reactors, are something that can be considered. So, I mean, we've literally seen, Germany even begin to question, and
Right.
they were one of the last holdouts. Taiwan, Spain are kind of the last holdouts where there's had been proceeding with the phase out of their nuclear energy programs, but now, faced with the loss of that baseload power, they're very quickly realizing, hey, wait a minute, this wasn't a luxury. This was something we really needed to
A
stabilize.
necessity. Yeah, and then
Yeah,
the World Bank recently just changed its rules to where
yeah.
they'll provide funding for nuclear power
They
generation.
were very much against funding for nuclear power, and now are working with the IAEA, and that will be very helpful in a lot of emerging markets
Sure.
where, let's face it, we have two markets now that are growing. With all of this nuclear growth over the last 20 years has really been an emerging market story
Mhm.
as they're trying to gain just a fraction of the quality of life that we enjoy in the developed world. But now, for the first time, we see the load growth demand increasing in the developed world, and
Yeah.
even before data centers, we were seeing electric vehicles, electrification of homes and businesses. A high-tech society runs on electricity,
Yep.
and then you layer on data centers, and now suddenly the growth is both emerging markets and developing worlds. So going to have to build a lot of generating capacity. And this was Trump's energy dominance policy, and literally declaring an energy emergency, which some people thought was sensational, but it really isn't.
It's true.
And if we want
Yeah.
to get out ahead of an energy crisis, if we want to have an energy crisis, let's just keep going down the path we were going. But if we want to stay ahead of it, we need to build out the gas pipelines, drill in that industry. We need nuclear plants to be licensed, permitted in under 18 months. And like I said, maybe extension of some of the coal plants for a couple more years than was planned. But if we do all those things, we will win the war on the AI battle with China, and we will be able to power the economy. So thank God we have a pro-energy administration
Hmm.
just at a time when our energy needs have really come back to the forefront.
Yeah, for sure. Well, before I let you go, any other parting thoughts as far as what we should be looking for in the near term? Any particular things that stand out over the balance of 2025?
Yeah, well, I'm incredibly bullish for uranium equities over the second half of this year. I mean, we really were hit by some of these false narratives like DeepSeek. Obviously, everything was knocked
Right.
back by Liberation Day markets, but we're now seeing uranium equities, on a steady recovery. And I think as uranium prices continue to increase into the end of the year, that utility purchasing cycle, the realization that there isn't a lot of uranium out there and that we truly are in a production-driven market and the inventories work down. I think companies like UEC, that just perfect timing.
Hmm.
The ramp up in Wyoming is going extremely well, and Texas, we're building out the first production area and the satellite at Burke Hollow for an October startup there. So it's exciting times. We're very much long gone are the treading water days or just,
Yeah.
permitting licensing. And we're in full operation mode right now, which is very exciting. And cash flow and revenues to come. All of our all of our production is unhedged
Yeah.
and uncommitted. So if you're a believer in higher prices, we're going to capture 100% of the upside.
Oh, for sure. Well, I appreciate it as always, Scott, giving everybody an update on what's going on in this sector. And folks, as I said right before Scott came on, if you're not already on my own mailing list, make sure you get on it. We're going to have some uranium and nuclear energy centric special information coming out imminently that'll follow up on some of these thoughts, add some others, some added color on some really cool things going on in the world as well, because I think that this is going to be a growing renaissance for this industry. And I know that you and Amir at UEC are pretty happy that you're in a catbird seat that you're in.
Absolutely. And uranium royalty couldn't be better
Yeah,
situated as well, going
yeah,
into the golden age of nuclear
yep,
energy. So this
yeah.
is exciting times.
And that's what it's going to be. Well, thanks again, Scott. We'll catch up again
Yep.
one of these days soon.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Take care.
For much more of the National Investor's cutting-edge content and actionable investment opportunities, make sure to subscribe to Chris's free content at nationalinvestor.com. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel too. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time